Okay, so the phonological interpretation that I'm going to use is sort of seated between Egyptian Greek section here and mostly drawing from this section. So I'm just going to go through what it says and explain it a little bit, and then maybe read a little bit of what they have as an example to demonstrate what they're saying. Loss of vowel length and spread of Greek under Alexander the Great led to a reorganization of vowels and phonology. So, ancient Attic Greek, there was a lot of phonemic vowel length differences that I cannot be bothered to. Um, I just don't find that as interesting to read that way. But it's also something that's lost by this point in time. If we're aiming for basically the Greek of the New Testament, they're not probably, as far as this says, I'm certainly no expert, they're not probably engaging in any intentional distinction between vowel length. So that leads us to this sort of chart of vowels. A lot of things that used to be a long vowel have been merged into their short form. The epsilon iota has been an E for a while at this point, apparently. And then there's this odd sort of distinction that people are unsure about, it seems like, between what the long E and the short E are doing at this point. I'm essentially trying to render it as a near close, but I'm not doing a remarkable job of distinguishing these two. I don't think that's very plausible. Just from trying to read the way the Greek words work, I this is one of those things I'm gonna put up my own doubts on. And as far as from a from an ergonomic perspective, in terms of what the phonosyntactic features feel like when you try to do them, some of these things feel a little bit hypothetical in a way that may have good evidence, but it just doesn't seem plausible to me in terms of how it feels when you try to say it that way. We're going to get to that with one of the other consonants, especially. So I'm just mostly putting them all into near close, and then trying to make that still be distinguished from an E, which is plausible. I mean, if you look at Swedish, they have a great number of vowels that are pretty darn close to one another, but it's not necessarily that the context cares to distinguish them quite as intensely as what goes on sort of in Greek from what I've seen so far. So here's a more, I guess, commonly important one that comes up. If you have a word like aftosh, I'm not very used to writing in Greek yet, but a word like this, um, originally this would have been altosh with a diphthong here that's sort of banded together. And they're starting to give up on that. Basically, they're rushing through it, and they're starting to turn this guy into whatever fits with the next consonant. In this case, is unvoiced, so it's being turned into a bilabial that is still rounded, which is what the W is. So it's alf. So if it's obviously hard to pronounce in isolation, but aftosh is voiceless, and this is not something you should ever look at because that's now mixing. But that's happening in both of these contexts, and also as far as I've seen, also intervocalic contexts where something like um, something like this might occur, be agua, and importantly, this is not fronted at all in these contexts, which is a bit counterintuitive in some ways. At least the way they're describing it here, it's not fronted. And maybe it would have been, but who knows? Um, but other than that, that is one important thing to note. These I am pronouncing fronted. So when we come to something like uh, this word, which I'm probably spelling wrong because I don't know how to spell it, kine, I'm pronouncing kine, kine, kine. Now that's very annoying to modern Greek speakers because they have turned this into an E. They basically dropped the rounding and turned it into E, so that all of these are all pronounced E. That's great and all, cool. But I actually really like that difference. It's sometimes kind of odd to shove this U into some Greek words, but I think there's a way that it feels right, at least in terms of how it feels in the mouth. God only knows what the actual evidence supports in terms of how they pronounce these things. But I'm just going off of sort of basic available information about what it might have been realized as. Here they're saying, the lip rounding may have been lost. It's yeah. I'm going to render it in most of my recordings as a rounded still, so that it's just barely stopping being a vowel. Aftosh, aftosh. Or if you bend your ears a little bit, you can almost hear like I'm saying altosh still, but it's just barely kind of giving up on being an actual vowel sound. There are a few different things here. So the put the k, I'm going to keep those as they are. There's not a lot of detail explained about those. Sounds great. It makes sense that they have this three-way distinction here between k, g, k, k, g, k, p. I'm trying to read this chart, and the chart is not representing what I'm trying the chart. I'm trying to read this chart, but the chart does not show what I want it to. A three-way distinction between an unaspirated, an aspirated, and a voiced consonant at three different locations. That is a cool system, cool idea, probably real. However, I probably real. However, I don't know how legitimate that really is. When it comes to reading a lot of these words in context, it just doesn't quite make sense for an aspirated T to be what theta is trying to be in a lot of these contexts. I don't know, man. I don't know. The aspirated k makes some sense. Aspirated k makes a little bit of sense. Um, Regardless, I'm just going to say for myself, I'm doing something rather weird in my recordings to maybe test out whether this is a plausible realization of these things. Put the k, reading it as is. There's some dispute about when beta starts to turn into a what would it be, an approximant. Um, but eventually in modern Greek we're getting to a v. At some point it was probably a b, and then they're going in between to something that is an IPA represented. Well, I should keep it right here. Let's say from b to what we represent as a beta to a v. I'm picking it here. I'm going into sort of a not uh, labiodental v, which is lip and tooth. I'm going bilabial approximate, so both lips, avo, avo, v, where it in some contexts can sound incredibly similar to a v, but it is not one. The d is also differences in each of these got loosened essentially into modern Greek. So in modern Greek, the d has become a th, like dedo in dedo in Spanish or something, which also cool, neat. I'm going to keep it as a plosive. I believe some of this has mentioned that the plosivity of the de right here is what I'm talking about. De probably remained plosive until 3rd century. So I'm going to assume that something in the gospel text probably was pronouncing this as a plosive D still. Um, I'm unsure whether or not I want to realize the g as a palatal. I think it's incredibly difficult to hear in certain contexts depending on how you do it, and I haven't seen much explanation of why. There's ways you can realize this that you can hardly hear is different, and others where it can disappear quite strongly. Like in modern Greek, there are many of these instances where the g sound is turned into a very um, slight sound similar to a double L in Spanish that might not even be a plosive L. Either way, that's we're just gonna see how that goes. I'm sort of allowing it to be this is a fricative, I believe, voiced velar fricative. So agwo, which approximate fricative. I'm not exactly well versed on the true difference here. I believe it's a bit of a degree of tenseness. So whether this gets loosened all the way to this might even be an actual approximate symbol. I don't know. Um, it says here, I think it's fricative, but whatever. Point being, it's probably not super plosive-y. That's fine. Makes a lot of sense. Eventually we get that way in modern Greek. All of this, again, it moves towards what makes sense in modern Greek, but we're making decisions here about how to realize Koine Greek in terms of whether or not some of these things have happened already in our estimation. Plus what I find fun to pronounce. Now, the weird ones. These ones have become fully fricative in the modern language. Theta and uh, whatever this letter is called. I don't even remember it. Still researching this. Kai over here, right? They're pronouncing. Again, I have almost zero exemplary vocabulary in my brain, other than things I'm reading out loud. Um, carismo, or something like that. Carizome, uh, becoming charizome, something like that. So they've loosened it completely. I'm going to maintain the plosive aspirated quality of Kai, like chronos instead of chronos. And I'm going to actually allow this one because of one of these notes in here. It suggested, you know, this one may have become a bilabial fricative pretty straightforwardly. Um, it says discussion happens below, and some of it doesn't actually happen below. So I've looked at a couple other sources on some of these things, and there's quite a big spread. So I'm willing to. This is partly why I'm willing to take so much license with just kind of devising an answer myself. So again, I'm going to go with a bilabial fricative on this letter, and this guy is the weirdest one. They claim that this was an aspirated dental. I don't know if anyone here is actually being specific enough about whether it's dental or alveolar, but whatever. I assume it's dental just because Europe. That's my sense of it. Um, that's a terrible explanation because German, but whatever. It seems like it's going to, from what I can hear arbitrarily in modern Greek, it seems like they're playing off of dental position, not alveolar. That also helps better with unaspirated T's or better to be pronounced in the teeth. And it says dental here for Christ's sake. So whatever. We're assuming it's dental as our place of articulation here for real and not something similar to that. They say it's an aspirated dental t, 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 like, I don't have any examples off the top of my head. Thanatos, 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 which it doesn't, that's an easier example where you've got a theta and a the in the same word, but it's also an example that really helps you hear the difference. There's lots of other instances in this language that I've seen already, like theta coming after an S, a sigma, where it starts becoming a little bit weirder to hear that there's aspiration. And a lot of people's renditions, especially a lot of people's linguistic renditions who are somewhat trained in linguistics, um, they're pronouncing something that's a little cartoonish. It doesn't seem like something someone would actually be doing if they're going around speaking the language. So what I've determined makes some sense here is we know that in modern Greek this has become good old interdental fricative th, like thanatos. And we know, hypothetically, we know that it started as some kind of aspirated T. I'm just going to say 20 seconds after it started being an aspirated T, they started doing something weird, which I'm going to describe as a, a T that is sort of realized as an affricate thing that kind of transitions into a theta. So instead of making the aspiration a breathy voice concept, I say my guess is 20 seconds after this was an aspirated T is now different from a the. Eventually, people will get sick of that very quickly because it's kind of hard to do, and they start loading the aspiration sound onto the place of articulation in the dental area and say thanatos, thanatos, not thanatos. It's not a fricative that I can hold. Thanatos. It's thanatos, thanatos, thana. Basically a plosive, like an interdental plosive kind of thing. In my experience, trying to put this in the words like thanatos, it's a little bit, I think it's perceptible quite straightforwardly that there's a difference between those two sounds, and it feels right. And I know that's a bit subjective. It's entirely subjective, but I feel like it feels right. So I'm going to go with that. And that gives us uh, different realizations like psyche, 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 where we have a full K sound, not psyche, or psyche, I guess would be the modern Greek. Um, anthropos, anthropos. See, the way I'm pronouncing it is nice and close to the modern theta, where in certain contexts I think it can slip into just being a theta. Like for instance in anthropos, the anthropos, the release of the te is harder to get because it's kind of shoved inside of the n, and then you're getting sort of just the fricative release of the theta. That's fine, fine by me. Eventually we know it becomes a theta, so whatever. All the rest of these are pretty much less disputed about, I guess. The aspiration, I've gone a little bit back and forth. I think my own articulation is casually losing the H myself, although I'm sort of in my mind preparing to be pronouncing the uh, the aspiration on the words like whole or hoti. So if we go over to an example, this is one that I've been struggling to get good with for a while here. Palin Homua Steen. So the O Omicron, it's not Omicron, or iota. Um, here is hypothetically being realized as an U, which is a bit odd to envision how that necessarily happened, but you can kind of get the idea that they're fronting the O because of the future coming iota, and it sort of blends into this high front rounded vowel u. Homua, homua, homua estin he basilia, basilia, basilia. Here we're taking the be, which I don't know if I talked about the beta. Um, I guess I did. I'm loosening it. Again, I'm loosening it to not a fricative v, but as an interlabial fricative va, vasilia, vasilia, he vasilia, where this on its own, eta on its own, we're pronouncing as high front, so near close front, but not up to an E level. Like modern Greek would turn this into a full E, but I'm keeping it a little bit lower because apparently that was happening. The This combination here, we're turning into an U. Very weird to imagine how that necessarily happens because uh, no aspect of the frontedness of the U appears to have been retained there. Hypothetically, in a previously it would have been O, 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 Oranon, 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 or Oranon, or depending how they're screwing with this. Um, Either way, now it appears by virtue of people's opinions here that we're turning this into a full back vowel, normal sense. Um, Sageni, here the iodicized eta is sort of cryptically actually it's a full E sound all the way to the way it would be pronounced in modern Greek. We're keeping this lower, so this sort of counterintuitive becomes shageni, shageni, ishten, ten, ten, not ten, ten, not ten, ten, talashan, 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 ke. That's been I think it was a more long-standing, or at this point, Koine, Kine. They're merging these diphthongs. So ke, ik, pantosh, kenos. There I'm basically pronouncing it as the palatal magic that they start doing in modern Greek. Shinagagushi, 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 Shinagagushi. We're keeping the front here and then bowing this to become a full E. Hin hote ble rote, anavivashentes, anavivashentes. Here you can probably hear a little bit clearer. I'm not saying anavivashentes, anavivashentes, anavivashentes. Staying bilabial. Epiton egialon, ke katishentes, katishentes. Again, sort of shortening this theta from a fricative in the way it would be in modern Greek, not kathishentes, which again is my completely hypothesized sort of guess about what feels right. Other than that, και αναβλέψας έλεγεν, βλέπω τους ανθρώπους, ότι ως δέντρα χορό περιπατούντας. I said that one about 1,000 times, so I'm getting a lot better at it. Και αναβλέψας. Here, it makes some sense that some of these are staying a bit like I'm allowing it to sort of float in between a plosive and a fricative approximant, depending on the context of what sounds are around it. Because anablepshash feels like it makes some sense. Anablepshash probably makes sense if I knew the word better. So I don't know. We'll see on that. Vlepo tus anthropus hoti hosh tendra with plosive de ro peripatuntas. Here's another interesting example. Pneuma, where we're saying, taking this and turning it into, I guess it would be a sort of weird high fronty thing, whatever we're talking about with that. And then this counterintuitively, because of I'm keeping the way that these are written in the more ancient Greek with more accent information than I am utilizing. They would have been using it for circumflex for like a pitch accent that is apparently completely lost, which that page I believe described. Pitch accents out of here. So it's entirely likely that they're still doing a raised pitch stressed syllable, but it's not necessarily informative the kind of pitch changes. It's just that their way of pronouncing the stressed thing is that it's higher. Pneumahoteos is similar enough. Instead of just pneumahoteos, where you can keep the pitch the same and stress it harder. But I am suspecting that they're probably raising the pitch. So pneumahoteos, ketusan, prosknuntas, afton and pneumati. In pneumati ke aletheia, where again, this is still bizarre to me, but alpha iota is just losing the iota altogether. It's just not even doing anything. Aletheia, di proskinin. The pneuma, we're doing that approximate here so that it's not a vowel at all. So in these, this is the same sort of instance as afton, except here before the T it's becoming voiceless. Here before a voiced M, it's staying as a voiced V, very much like the beta. And then we're pronouncing whatever kind of A you want, but there could be specific. Pneuma, which really means that pneuma. Pneumotheos, και τους προσκυνούντας αυτόν εν πνεύματι και αλετεία λι προσκυνήν. All right, that's my take on it. I probably missed some obscure instance of combination of sounds that will just come up later, and you'll have to assume I made it up.